Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. Gene Barber served the people of Williamson County as its sheriff for 7 years. He sold cars and lumber and delivered the mail in the years before that, but that all came after 33 months at sea, serving aboard the USS Corregidor during 4 major battles of World War II's Pacific Campaign. A resident of Caldwell since the early 50s, and you will not find a bigger Bob Wills fan anywhere. And why not? He and Bob Wills share the town of Kosse as a birthplace. It's a pleasure to welcome Gene Barber to Veterans of the Valley. Indeed, it is a pleasure to welcome you, Gene. I want to get right to your service. First off, when you joined up, you were kind of young. You graduated from high school when you were 16. By 17, you were ready to go, but Mom and Dad sort of had different ideas. You kind of butted heads on that, right?
That's true. I went to Dallas, Texas, and sent the papers back home to Mom and Dad and asked them if they wouldn't sign them and send them up there. My dad thought I was too young, thought I ought to wait till I was 18, you know, like the rest of the guys.
Right.
But it didn't. They sent them back, and my first troop train trip was from Dallas, Texas to San Diego.
Right. You were 17 years old.
17 years old.
It must have been kind of a scary deal for you. I know you were gung-ho ready to go, but it must have been kind of a scary deal for a 17-year-old. That's a long way away from your hometown of Bremont.
It really is, and no one went in with me from my hometown. That was the thing. I was by myself, and the only person that I really got acquainted with was Kilroy.
Right.
Every place I went, he'd done been there.
Exactly. That's what you saw, the signs, right?
The signs were everywhere.
The fact that you did join up probably kept you from going to Europe. A lot of the kids that were drafted at that time did go to Europe, served in the Battle of the Bulge, some tough times. You lost some friends there, I know, in Europe. But by joining up, you got assignment to the Pacific.
That's true. My best friend was a little bit older than I,
right.
And he joined. He was waited till he was drafted, and then he was in the Battle of the Bulge and lost his life there.
Right.
Dan Scott McCall Jr. was one of the best friends that I had in high school. Played football together, and Dan went to Europe.
Right.
I went to the Navy. I chose the Navy because I thought I'd learn something in the Navy, and I did.
Right. All this was after you had served some 8 years in the Air Force Reserve, and that's sort of where you learned to trade as a machinist, which is the way that you eventually served in the Navy.
Well, I learned to be a machinist in the Navy.
Right.
I went through, in November of 1942, the war had been going on since December of 41.
Right.
Pearl Harbor happened.
Pearl Harbor.
And I was lucky in boot camp. The 4 camps in San Diego were right together. It's Camp Decatur, and Camp Luce, and Camp Mahan, and Camp Farragut. And you go to Decatur for the boot camp. And when you get out of boot camp, then if you get a school, you may stay in the same area. And I was lucky. I got Group 3 schools in San Diego, California.
Right.
And they taught me how to use a hammer and a hacksaw
Right.
and a file
Right.
and hand tools. And they also gave us some time on the lathe, milling machine, and shaper.
Right.
And I applied myself. I finally decided that maybe I needed to, bear down and do things like you ought to do.
Exactly.
And they gave me a fireman first rate out of Group 3 schools and assigned me my first assignment at new construction out of Astoria, Oregon.
Right.
And that's where we picked up the Corregidor.
Right. Talk about the USS Corregidor. I know it was what you call a baby flat top,
Right.
a smaller carrier, usually held like 18 bombers, 18 fighters. A little bit of the history of the Corregidor. I'll tell the folks, originally it was the Aguila Bay, but then it was reassigned as the Corregidor, launched in May of 1943, built by the Kaiser Shipbuilding Company. It joined the Carrier Division 24 at Pearl Harbor for airstrikes in the Gilbert Islands, and then later in early 44 in the Marshall Islands operations, providing air cover. That was just pretty much its job.
Right.
Now you talk about your impressions of the ship where you lived for so long.
Well, the reason why I give them credit for teaching me discipline. When I first went aboard the carrier, I was a member of the original crew, which they call you plank owner,
Right.
especially on the plank owner in the flight deck of the ship that you're assigned to.
Right.
Well, I am a plank owner in the USS Corregidor. And I picked up the ship. They brought it down from Vancouver, down the river to Astoria, and Seaside, 2 little places there on in Oregon. And we came aboard the first day, and you always muster on the flight deck. Well, I mustered on the flight deck in my blues, and I went down to the engine room in my blues. And an old chief that was there was sitting on a bank of valves, and he called me over because he saw I was different from the others, and I had my blues on. And he gave me my first assignment.
Right.
which was, and it had to be.
He's a tough old bird,
it's
right?
tough. He was tough.
Yeah.
And it was a good assignment. Everybody else was in their dungarees,
Right.
but I was in my blues. And he told me, he said, go back up top side and get you some new underwear, clean underwear,
Right.
and a change of clothes, and come back. And I thought, well, what in the world is going on? What kind of Navy is this? And when I came back, he told me, he said, there's a chore we've got to do, and said, you've been chosen to do it. Said, take the plate up, the floor plate up, and we took it up, and underneath that floor plate was another plate that had a great number of bolts in it, and it was in the main sump tank. It was on the main sump tank of the engine. The engine was a Skinner Uniflow engine made in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And it wasn't the type of reciprocating engine that the old Navy had, which you had 3 pistons, you know, a big one and an intermediate and a small one, and they exhausted from one piston to the other.
Right.
Skinner Uniflows were like a diesel. And they had run this ship, the 2 engines that were on the ship, 2 motors, that had brought it down from Bremerton, I mean, not from Bremerton, Vancouver.
Right.
And on the shakedown, you've got to pump the main sump oil out and renew it, like changing your oil in an engine.
And this was your job to do?
This was my job.
And you did it?
We crawled down in the sump and wiped all the way from the front to the end of the sump with rags, and took every bit of oil and every bit of babbitt that had come off of those bearings, and got them out and put new oil in it. And when I got out, I thought, well, now, I was sweating just about as much as I was wiping oil. I was wiping sweat off myself about as fast as I was doing oil. And he told me, said, now go back up and put your clothes on and come back. And when I came back in, he said, you see that little line over in the corner there? And we call, you know, valves and pipes, all types are called lines. And he said, I want to know what's in the line, which way it's going, how much pressure's on it, and where to cut it off. And said, before you leave here today, you come tell me. And I looked at him. He said, every man in this engine room will know everything about every line in here. And of course, that's for safety. You know,
Right,
if you
sure.
take a hit, you got to know where to cut it off.
Exactly.
I learned every line in the engine room. I thought they were picking on me, but it was something we had to do.
It turns out though that this superior, whenever you came up for promotion, he recommended
Every
you
time.
for promotion.
Every time.
So obviously there was a lot of respect
Right.
there that you gained for him. Corregidor, you said, was in 4 major battles, and you were in those battles with him. Talk a little bit about the major battles that you were in and some of your memories of those. I know this was the height of the war in the Pacific.
Well, we set out from Pearl Harbor with the Corregidor and Liscum Bay and the Kosse, which were 3 baby flat tops that were built right together, 56, 57, and 58. And we had other ships in the formation, of course, and went down to take what we thought was the first islands back from the Japanese. It was in the 3 islands that we were to look at were Macon, Little Macon, and Tarawa. And I'd never heard of those islands, you know, but meantime, we had practiced doing sub-patrol. In those days, they had a torpedo-looking object that was called a Fido that they'd drop in the water, and it would sit there until a ship came between buoys that they had placed, or a submarine. And when it came by, then that thing would take off after them like a dog, and it was powered by compressed air.
Right.
And if it didn't hit the ship, then it would sink to the bottom of the ocean and wouldn't bother nobody. We tried those things for a while and did that for a little while. But when we went to Tarawa and Macon and Little Macon, we went to give support to the ground troops,
Right.
which was something that baby flat tops we didn't think were maybe really capable of doing a good job, but we did.
Right.
In the mornings, we would about 4 o'clock in the morning, they'd call general quarters, get everybody up, and they'd refuel all the planes and bring all the bombs up from or whatever they're going to use that day to the ships and put put them aboard, and then they'd take off about daylight because we didn't have people that flew at night, not on baby flat tops, and had F4Fs. And
the fighters were the F4F
F4F
Wildcats.
fighter,
They were
Wildcat,
made by Grumman, right?
by Grumman. And the TBM, like the president has out at the museum.
Right.
It was one of the planes that we had on there.
Right.
And
The Avenger, I believe.
Avenger, that's right. Those were two, TBMs and TBF. One was just made at a different place from the other, but they were both just alike. And we gave them ground support every morning, fly them off and bring them back. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. If you've ever been to sea on a carrier, the way that they take off and the way that they land.
I cannot imagine seeing it in person. Obviously, I've seen old war footage of it, but I'm sure that it doesn't do it justice as actually seeing it, especially as the sound and the sight.
When they land, when they take off, they're loaded.
Right.
And on a baby flat top, you had to steam into the wind. You know, you had to turn it into the wind because they didn't go fast enough. 19 knots, if there wasn't any wind, it was hard for them to get altitude.
Right.
And sometimes they'd go in the drink when they'd go off the front of the ship. They'd go down like this and then pull up, you know.
The length of the Corregidor was 512 feet 3 inches to be exact. That's about a football field. Right.
The best carrier, best pilots in the world were on those carriers. If you could land on one of those things, you could land on anything.
Right.
Anyway, we'd fly them in, and they would come back and get another load and go. And they bombed Tarawa forever. And the big ships that were there, that like I believe the Big Potato was there, Utah and some of those, they shelled that island forever. There wasn't anything left hardly standing, but they were dug into where, when the Marines went in there, we had terrible losses. It was terrible, you know, the men that we lost more men there than ever. And of course, the worst thing that happened to us, one morning when we were doing all this, getting ready to go bomb, and they were piping up the oil, the fuel, and bringing up the bombs to load the planes to send them off. USS Lipscomb Bay was steaming about 220 yards off of our, I believe it was a starboard bow. We were all three right together. And a Japanese submarine launched a torpedo that hit about 3/4 way back on the USS Lipscomb Bay. And I never had any idea. We knew what was going on. We were at quarters already. We were at general quarters because we were getting ready like everybody else. And when we heard the commotion and heard what was going on, I was stationed then, of course, I still had my red stripe. It was my first trip down at a repair station. And me and Paul Argo, another guy, we pulled up and went up the uptakes. Uptakes on a ship is where the air circulates back up. They pump air down into the ship and then it goes back up and out the side.
Right.
We went through the uptakes and we watched as the Lipscomb Bay was sinking. Terrible, terrible thing. They couldn't even get water to put, you know, on the fire. The gasoline that they were putting in the airplanes ignited on a hangar deck.
Yes, sir.
And the whole ship from one end to the other was burning and red hot. And it sank stern first. It went down with the back end going down first. And they lost over 600 men in about 20 minutes.
Wow.
And it was, well, if you've never seen it before and you're on a ship just like it, you wonder what in the world are we doing out here with this?
Exactly.
And it was awesome.
And you look at that and you say that, you know,
it could be me.
Could be our ship.
Could be our ship.
Exactly. Exactly. I want to go to some photographs right now, just a few that you supplied to us, some pictures, and some things also, some of your memorabilia from World War II. I want to go to some of those and have you talk about them right now. They'll show up on the screen here. First off, there is a young sailor, Gene Barber. About when was this picture taken?
That had to be taken about 1943.
Yeah, and that was, were you already on the Corregidor at that time?
I was on the Corregidor when that was taken.
Good looking sailor. All right, let's move on. Now you all are having a little refreshment.
Yeah, that's me on the way over on the, I guess, the right-hand side.
On the right side,
And yeah, we were partaking there.
That was in San Diego?
San Diego.
Right.
I think that was at the spinning wheel. I'm not sure, but we went to 2 or 3 clubs there, the Rainbow and the Spinning Wheel, and sometimes
Gene,
one or two.
you're smiling. That looks like that might not have been your first beer at the time. Okay, let's move on. There's the Corregidor.
That is the Corregidor.
Quite a carrier.
Beautiful ship. It had
Yeah.
twin 20s and twin 40s, and on the fantail we had a 5-inch gun, and that was all the armament that they had. And the deck, the flight deck's made out of plank,
Right.
wood. It's wooden flight decks, and they could steam about 19 knots at top speed.
Exactly.
And they had to go into the wind if we were carrying loaded planes. If they were launching loaded planes, you almost had to steam in the wind to get enough altitude, when they launched them.
And it would carry a crew of 860 officers and men.
Right.
Displacement of 7,800 tons.
You can imagine with a crew of 800 and something, and you have 600 and something that you lost. That's the biggest loss of any one ship except the Arizona.
Right. Right. All right, let's move on. Here is the crew of the Corregidor, and you are the
Yeah.
second row, or the first row, second from the left, I believe.
That's right.
Is that
Over on
you?
the end there.
On the left side, second from the left. That's you. And
That's on the flight deck of the USS Corregidor.
right now, R.L. Bowman was the captain. Is he in that picture?
No, sir. He's
Okay.
not in there.
Okay. This was after that.
These are mostly chiefs that's in
I
there.
see. I see. It's a good-looking crew. And
That's me
there
and a
we go.
friend of mine from Bremond, Texas, named McMahon.
You're on the
Jack-
right with the dark glasses.
That's me with the dark glasses and the rolled up breeches.
That wasn't Reg, was it?
No, it wasn't Ray. Walking down the streets of Honolulu.
Honolulu. Here's the 4 medals that represent the 4 major battles that you were in, also your dog tags and the ribbons that go with the medals.
Right.
So what from the top row there from left to right, do you know what medals those are?
Well, there's the American campaign and the Asiatic Pacific and one other. I forget what the other one is.
And
Victory Medal.
Victory Medal. There you go.
And of course, good conduct.
I want you to tell us a story about the time when you had a leave of 14 days and what happened.
When we came back from Chihuahua, Macon and Little Macon, we came into Pearl Harbor and they sent us right on to the States. We tied up in San Diego and I got a 14-day leave.
Right.
Happy to get, out and going. I had enough money saved up that I could buy an airplane ticket, and I did. And we got on the plane and got as far as Phoenix, Arizona. And in Phoenix, Arizona, they put us off the plane, displaced us because somebody had a higher priority than we did. I think it was cadets that they were training. In those days you had a priority for everything,
Right.
And when I got off the plane, they said, we'll pick you up the next morning and you come back, we'll give you another ship to go on. And so we partied that night. And if you've ever, well, I know you haven't, but if you ever wore a pair of Navy breeches, Navy pants, everything, you don't have any pockets.
Right.
So you fold everything and put it in your belt like this and then pull your jumper back over it. And I went home and went back to the hotel after we had been partying and got up the next morning and I didn't have my leave papers. I had my plane ticket, I had everything I needed except those leave papers.
Right.
And I knew I'd lost them somewhere. And the friend that I was traveling with came off the same ship that I did and had a set of leave papers. And I said, I know I can't get by MPs unless I have some leave papers. So I took a typewriter, rented a typewriter, and got in there and I typed up a whole new set of leave papers for Thomas E. Gene Barber off the USS Corregidor.
Oh my.
And I signed Roscoe L. Bowman, who was the captain of our ship, to the bottom of those leave papers.
It's been over 60 years
It's
now. I
been a
think you're
long
okay.
time, and I think I'm probably all right. But I went home, and on the way, they looked good. Honestly, they looked as good as
They look legit.
the guy that
Right.
that I copied them off of, because
Sure.
it was the same. But it was a pretty big thing to do, to sign your captain's name to
Right.
your leave papers.
Right.
Folded them, got on the plane, come on back, and avoided every MP I could see at Dallas Airport. And I was still kind of skittish, so I caught that old interurban that used to go from Dallas down to Waco.
Right.
Because I thought, well, there won't be nobody on it. rode it to Waco, and then I highwayed it from Waco to Bremont.
Right.
About 3 mornings after that, I was sleeping late, and Mother came in, woke me up, and said, Gene said, the postmaster is here, and he wants to talk to you. So I got up and went. I knew Mr. Alfred Clark, and grew up, knowing him all my life, and his daughter went to school with me. And Mr. Clark was a big joker anyway, but he came and he said, Gene said, they've called me, and they say that you're AWOL. And I said, Mr. Clark, I'm not AWOL. I know I've got leave till, time to get back to the ship. He said, well, do you have some leave papers? And I was scared to show him those fake leave papers. I said, yes, sir, I got some. But he says, well, I've got some too. He said, somebody in Phoenix, Arizona picked these leave papers up off the street and saw that you were coming to Bremont, and said they sent them to airmail to the Bremont postmaster, and said, I brought them over here to you. One of the kindest things that ever happened to him.
So he was
a real friend.
And yeah, he was.
And whoever picked him
up. And the postmaster was just trying to pull one over on you on the AWOL thing, just to see what you would say.
I often wondered, how I got back, or if I got caught getting back.
Right.
Because I had real ones, and I had to show them going back.
Right, right. Your service was over, and eventually you also went. I want you to talk just briefly about the USS Oglethorpe, because eventually you went to that boat. That was an AK-100 landing craft.
Right.
Right. Talk just a little bit about that boat.
Well, after Guam, Saipan, and Tinian, we came off the Corregidor, and I flew back from Pearl Harbor that time, all the way to Oakland, California. And for a short time, I ran, helped with MPs. I was a first-class petty officer by then, and they give you a little better deal than they do when you just got one red stripe. Anyway, we got all the way back to Texas for 14 days, and then I had to report into new construction in Kearney, New Jersey. And Kearney, New Jersey is, close to New York City.
Right.
And for a while, I was stationed at Pier 92 in New York City. And when the year that President Roosevelt died, I was in a parade down Fifth Avenue
in New York City.
In New York City.
Right.
And Pier 92 was the famous ship was tied up at the next pier over.
Right.
Was the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides.
Right.
Old Ironsides was there. And we always said that she was aground on coffee grounds. She was sitting there so long and throwing the coffee over. But in the new assignment was the best duty that I ever had.
Indeed it was. There's so much more to your career, and there's so much more after your career. You sold cars, you sold lumber, you carried the mail, and you were the sheriff of Burleson County for some 7 years after that.
Well, it was more than 7. It was 11.
11 years, yes, as you were the sheriff of Burleson County. I got the pleasure of being in your home the other day, and I tell you what, before we talk about this, we've got a guest here that I want her to come on and join us here on the set. You don't know about this, but I want you to tell me about your love of Bob Wills. And then I want to introduce you. Ann, have a seat. This is Ann Black. Ann is the executive director of MSC Opus here. You are a lover of Bob Wills. How did that come all about?
Well, when I was in high school, one of the first times that I heard, in Bremont, Texas, I walked back and forth to school. And I had to walk down Highway 6 and 14. There was a cafe there, Elite Cafe. And the first time I heard Bob Wills and Texas Playboys was in that cafe. And they were playing San Antonio Rose.
Right.
The newest record of San Antonio Rose, and it was didn't have words. It was the old one. And I thought, Lord, that is beautiful music. And that was the first time that I, really appreciated. And then when they put words to it and put the band together, made the big band, and it had the big band sound on the new San Antonio Rose, then it really helped. These people play. They can really play. And all the time that I was growing up, we played Bob Wills music, and listened to it.
Well, I'll tell you what, as a matter of fact, in your home, you have a mini museum of Bob Wills memorabilia is about. And Ann Black wants to make your love of Bob Wills a little bit more special. Ann, what have we got?
Mr. Barber, thank you, first of all, for your service to this country. My daddy taught me to dance to San Antonio Rose. This is a gift certificate for 2 tickets for a ride with Bob, the Bob Wills musical. Now, of course, it isn't Bob Wills and his Playboys, but it's Ray
It comes
Benson
close.
and Asleep at the Wheel. If
Oh,
you're not
gosh.
familiar with them, they
That
do
is
justice
neat.
to Bob Wills, and
I'm familiar with it.
we hope you'll come and enjoy a little trip down memory lane.
Good.
And thank you for sharing your memories with us.
This is wonderful. This is really wonderful.
Bob didn't know about this. Gene didn't know about this, and Ann, thank you for doing this. I know it's a pleasure for you all to do this. And the date for this particular performance?
It's February 1st or 2nd.
Okay.
You can pick your date and take the gift certificate to the box office sometime in August or September is early enough. It's not until February, so
Okay.
decide which night you'd like to come.
That is great. I mean to tell you, when I worked for the post office, I was the state steward for a long time, and I hunted all about. That's before Benson and any of them started doing, redoing. Before it was rejuvenated. And I had all kinds of old, wore-out records that Bob Wills. I go to all the music places that fixed, jukeboxes, and pick them up. And I went all over the state, and I picked up a lot of good ones, and some that these people don't even know about. I've got 2.
And you've got some great stories, and we're out of time though right now, but I want you to enjoy the play. Thank you very much for your
really
service.
appreciate that.
You bet, and thank you, Ann. Gene Barber and his wife Doris have been married more than 60 years. They have a daughter and a son, 3 grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren. He's rightly proud of them, and we're proud of his service. We salute him, and we salute all veterans. And we invite you to join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.